I spent 38 years as a CPA. I want you to understand what that means before I tell you what happened in Rio, because I think it is relevant context. 38 years of other people's numbers. 38 years of spreadsheets and tax returns and quarterly filings, and the specific discipline of a profession built entirely on the premise that numbers do not lie and that the job is to read them accurately and report them honestly. I was good at it. I was, by any reasonable measure, exceptionally good at it. My clients stayed with me for decades. I had a woman named Greta who first hired me in 1991 to do her small business returns and who was still with me when I retired in 2020, 29 years later. She sent me a card when I retired that said, "You always told me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it." That is the best thing anyone ever said to me professionally. I am telling you this because I want you to understand the specific quality of the mistake I made in Rio. It was not the mistake of a careless man. It was not the mistake of someone who does not pay attention to numbers. It was the mistake of a man who understood money with precision for 38 years, and then, in the specific circumstances of Rio de Janeiro and a cooking class in Ipanema and a woman named Ana Paula, stopped applying that understanding to his own life. I still do not entirely understand how that happened. I am working on it. My name is Dennis Walsh. I am 68 years old. I was born in Tucson in 1956, grew up there, went to the University of Arizona on a partial scholarship, studied accounting because my father was an accountant and because I was good with numbers in the specific way that some people are good with numbers. Not as an interest, but as a native language, the way certain people hear music and others see shapes. I graduated in 1978, passed the CPA exam, and joined a mid-size firm in Phoenix where I spent 12 years before going independent in 1990. Independent practice suited me. I am, by temperament, a person who prefers to organize his own time rather than have it organized by an institution. My clients were small businesses mostly, contractors, restaurants, a few medical practices, a commercial real estate operation that grew from 2 properties to 11 over the 15 years I worked with them. I knew their numbers better than they did in most cases. I knew when a business was healthy and when it was performing healthy, and the difference between those two things, which is a significant difference that most business owners prefer not to examine too closely. I was married to Patrice from 1982 to 2009. We have 2 sons, Kevin, 40, in Portland, and Mark, 37, in Dallas. The divorce was not dramatic. It was the divorce of 2 people who had been good partners and had become, over the course of 27 years and 2 children and a lot of quiet evenings where neither of us had much to say, something closer to colleagues than spouses. Patrice said this at the mediation with the specific precision of someone who has had the sentence ready for a while. I said, "I know, because I did." We remained on good terms. We still do. She remarried in 2013, a retired engineer named Gary who plays golf 4 days a week and who seems, from what I can observe, to be exactly the right person for the version of Patrice that exists in 2013 and beyond. I am glad for her. I mean that without irony. After the divorce, I lived alone in Phoenix for 11 years. The practice filled the days. Kevin and Mark visited at holidays. I played tennis twice a week with a group of men I had been playing with since 1995, 2 of whom have since died, and whose absence from the court I feel with the specific weight of things that are not replaced. I traveled occasionally, a trip to Italy in 2014, a week in Vancouver in 2016, New Orleans twice because I find it unreasonable, and I mean that as a compliment. I had a life that was, by any honest measure, good. I retired in March 2020, which was either the worst possible timing or the best, depending on how you look at it. The pandemic made the first 6 months of retirement essentially identical to everyone else's first 6 months of 2020, which meant that the specific grief of leaving a career I had built over 4 decades was somewhat obscured by the larger ambient grief of that year. This may have been useful. It prevented me from sitting with the transition too directly. By 2021, I was ready to go somewhere. Kevin suggested Europe. Mark suggested nothing because Mark was in the middle of a complicated divorce of his own and had limited bandwidth for his father's retirement planning. A man I played tennis with named Carl had been to Brazil twice and described Rio with the specific evangelical enthusiasm of someone who has had an experience they consider underappreciated and want to correct. He said, "Dennis, Rio will rearrange you." I said, "I don't need rearranging." He said, "Yes, you do. You just don't know it yet." I booked a flight in January 2022. 3 weeks, one-way ticket. I told myself one-way meant flexibility rather than commitment. Kevin, when I told him, asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. I was going to Brazil. People go to Brazil. He said, "Dad, one-way?" I said it was a practical decision about flight costs. He accepted this explanation with the politeness of a son who has learned which arguments to pick. I arrived in Rio on a Wednesday afternoon in February. The heat was substantial and immediate. The taxi to the hotel in Leblon cost more than I expected, and I made a note of it, because I am a person who makes notes of things. And then I went to the room and opened the balcony door and heard the city and thought, Carl was not wrong. The first week I explored with the methodical thoroughness of someone accustomed to due diligence. I walked every neighborhood I intended to spend time in. I identified the grocery stores and the pharmacies and the ATMs and the restaurants within a reasonable radius of the hotel. I went to the beach every morning and walked from Leblon to Ipanema and back and thought about nothing in particular, which is a thing I had not done in a long time and which I found more difficult than I expected. In the second week, I signed up for a cooking class. This requires some explanation because I do not cook. I have not cooked meaningfully since Patrice left, and I have not felt the absence. I signed up for the cooking class because the hotel concierge, when I asked what activities were available for someone who wanted to understand the city rather than merely visit it, listed 3 things, and the cooking class was the one that sounded least like a tour group. The class met on Tuesday and Thursday mornings in a kitchen space on the ground floor of a building in Ipanema that smelled permanently and pleasantly of something being cooked in the apartment above. There were 8 students. The instructor was a woman named Sonia, who had been teaching Brazilian cooking to foreigners for 12 years, and who had the specific authority of someone who has taught the same material long enough that the teaching has become something closer to conversation. Ana Paula was also in the class. She was there as an assistant. Sonia brought in local volunteers periodically to help with the larger classes, and this was one. Ana Paula helped with the prep work and circulated among the students, answering questions and correcting technique with the light touch of someone who knows more than she is demonstrating and is being careful not to overwhelm. She was 34 years old. She had grown up in Mayer in the North Zone, in a family she described as large and complicated and deeply attached to each other. Her word was enmeshed, which surprised me because it was a precise word for a specific thing, and I had not expected it. Her mother, Dona Conceição, had raised 4 children largely alone after Ana Paula's father left when Ana Paula was 9. Her brothers were Rodrigo, 31, and Felipe, 28. Her uncle Helio was her mother's brother and had been a father figure of sorts. Her cousin Viviane was her closest friend. I learned all of this over the course of the 2-week class. We talked during the breaks and after the class ended, standing on the sidewalk in the Ipanema morning with the city beginning its day around us. She was curious about accounting in the specific way of someone who has spent her life around financial instability and finds the idea of someone who understands money professionally both foreign and fascinating. She asked questions that were genuinely intelligent, not about tax strategy or investment theory, but about the psychology of it. Why people make the financial decisions they make when the numbers clearly point in the other direction. I said, that is the question I spent 38 years not being able to fully answer. She laughed. She had a specific laugh. Brief, real, slightly surprised at itself. The laugh of someone who finds things funny and is not performing finding them funny. I have thought about that laugh many times in the 18 months since. She came to dinner with me on the last Thursday of the class. We went to a restaurant in Leblon she chose. Seafood, outdoor tables, the specific warm ease of a Rio evening that makes indoor dining feel like a choice you would only make if the weather forced it. We talked for 3 hours. When she left, I walked back to the hotel and stood at the balcony and thought, I am not going home in a week. I extended the trip to 6 weeks, then to 3 months. Then I stopped putting an end date on it. I moved out of the hotel in April and into an apartment in Leblon, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor with high ceilings and a kitchen that worked and a building from the 1960s that had the specific solidity of construction from an era when solidity was the point. The rent was $2,800 a month, which was more than I had planned, but less than I had been paying at the hotel, and I signed a 12-month lease with the specific confidence of a man who has decided something without fully examining the decision. Ana Paula and I were together by May, not living together. She had her own apartment in Tijuca that she shared with a roommate, but together in the sense that matters. She came to Leblon most evenings. We cooked, which was her influence, and talked, and walked to the beach at night when the crowds had thinned. And I discovered, over the course of that spring, that I had been lonelier in Phoenix than I had understood myself to be while I was there. The family arrived gradually, not physically. They were in May, and I did not meet them until June. But they arrived as a presence in conversations first, then as a context for decisions, then as a direct participant in the financial life I was living in Rio in ways I did not map accurately until much later. The first request came in late May. Ana Paula's brother Rodrigo had a debt, a personal loan from a friend that had come due and that he could not cover because his construction job had been paused for 3 weeks due to a material delay on the site, and his pay had been paused with it. The amount was $4,000. Ana Paula did not ask me directly. She mentioned it in the way you mention something you are worried about and are not sure whether to ask for help with, obliquely, letting the information exist in the air between us. I said, "How much does he need?" She said, "I don't want to ask you for that." I said, "Ana, how much?" $4,000. I transferred it to Rodrigo's account the following morning. Ana Paula thanked me with a sincerity that I received as evidence that she had not expected me to do it and was genuinely moved that I had. I understand now that sincerity and expectation are not mutually exclusive. At the time, I received it as evidence of her character. In June, she took me to Maye to meet her mother. Dona Conceição was 64, small and precise and formidably observant, with the quality of attention that comes from raising 4 children alone in a neighborhood that required vigilance. She made lunch, a full Sunday lunch with more food than 8 people could have finished, which is a thing certain mothers do as a demonstration that abundance is possible even when it has not always been. And she was warm to me in the specific way of someone who has assessed a situation and decided that warmth is the correct response to it. I liked her. That is the honest truth. I liked Dona Conceição, and I liked the lunch, and I liked the specific quality of that afternoon. The noise and the food, and the Portuguese I was still learning enough of to follow in pieces, and Ana Paula translating the parts I missed. I liked the sense of being inside something, a family, a Sunday, a life that was larger than the apartment in Leblon and the tennis courts in Phoenix. I did not understand, sitting at that table with Dona Conceição's food and the family's noise around me, that I was also being assessed. That the warmth was real and was also a door. That a man with money and a family with needs is not simply a guest, he is a resource, and resources have a way of being organized around. I am not saying this with bitterness. I have spent a great deal of time trying to say it accurately, and accurately means without bitterness, but also without the naivety of the man I was sitting at that table. The requests came in waves. Not all at once, that is important to understand. If they had come all at once, the accounting would have been visible from the beginning and I would have seen what I was looking at. They came in waves, with gaps between them, each one arriving in a context that made it feel singular and urgent and reasonable. Rodrigo's debt was April. In June, it was Dona Conceição's knee. She had been having pain for 2 years, a torn meniscus that the public health system had scheduled for surgery in 11 months. A private clinic in Barra could do it in 3 weeks. The cost was $16,000. Ana Paula told me this as a fact about her mother's situation, not as a request. I asked how much. She said she wasn't asking me. I said, Ana Paula, I'm asking you. How much? $16,000. I paid it. Dona Conceição's surgery was 3 weeks later. It went well. She sent me a message through Ana Paula, in Portuguese, which Ana Paula translated, that said she would pray for me every day for the rest of her life. I found this moving. I still find it moving, which is a complicated thing to sit with. In July, Felipe, the younger brother, had a problem with his motorcycle. He used it for delivery work, app-based delivery, which was his primary income, and it had broken down in a way that the repair estimate said would cost more than the motorcycle was worth and that a replacement would cost $3,000. Without the motorcycle, he could not work. I gave him $3,000. He bought the motorcycle. He sent me a voice message in Portuguese that Ana Paula summarized as, "He says you're a good man and he won't forget this." He has not, to my knowledge, forgotten it. But the $3,000 was also gone. Uncle Helio appeared in August. He was Dona Conceição's brother, 67, retired from a government job, a man with a slow smile and the careful dignity of someone who does not like to ask for things and asks anyway because necessity has overridden preference. He had a piece of land in the interior of Rio State that he had been trying to sell for 4 years. A buyer had finally appeared, but the paperwork required an update to the property registration. A legal process that his lawyer said would cost $8,000 and take 60 days. He did not have the $8,000. Without the registration update, the sale could not proceed. Without the sale, he could not pay a debt that was accruing interest. Ana Paula brought this to me with the specific discomfort of someone who knows they are asking something significant and wishes they were not. She said, "I know this is a lot." I told her the amount was not a problem. It was not, at that point, A problem. I paid Halio's registration fee. I want to pause here and tell you what the accounting looked like at the end of August. Not because I was running it at the time, I was not, but because I have run it many times since, and it is important to see the shape of it. April through August, Rodrigo's debt, $4,000. Dona Conceição's surgery, $16,000. Felipe's motorcycle, $3,000. Halio's registration fee, $8,000. Plus the apartment at $2,800 per month for 5 months, which was $14,000. Plus living expenses, travel with Ana Paula, 2 long weekends in Buzios and 1 in Paraty. The dinner on Ana Paula's birthday at the restaurant in Ipanema, where I told the waiter to bring whatever she wanted. Plus the new television for Dona Conceição's apartment because she had mentioned twice that the old one had problems, which I chose to interpret as an opening. $61,000 in 5 months. I was not tracking it. I want to be very precise about this. I was a CPA for 38 years, and from April through August of 2022, I was not tracking my own money. I am still trying to understand this with the rigor I would have applied to a client's situation. The closest I can get is this. I had decided, somewhere between the cooking class and the Sunday lunch in Mayer, that the life I was living in Rio was worth what it cost, and having decided that, I stopped calculating the cost. This is the most expensive decision I have ever made. And I made it without knowing I was making it. In September, Rodrigo had another problem. Not the debt this time, a different problem. He had been offered a partnership in a small construction business. A friend of his, a man named Augusto, was starting a tile and flooring company and needed a partner with construction experience. Rodrigo had the experience. What he needed was capital, his share of the startup costs, which Augusto had calculated at $22,000. Ana Paula presented this to me carefully. She said she understood it was a lot to ask. She said Rodrigo was good at his work and that this was a real opportunity. She said she was not asking me to decide, just to know that the opportunity existed. I said, "What does the business plan look like?" She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "The business plan. What are the startup costs for? What is the projected revenue? What is Rodrigo's role? What is the exit if it doesn't work?" She looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before, not defensive, but surprised, as if the questions themselves were unexpected. She said she would ask Rodrigo. Rodrigo came to the apartment 2 days later. He brought a folder, handwritten notes, a list of equipment costs, a rough projection of jobs for the first 6 months. It was not a business plan in any formal sense. It was the kind of document a man makes when he is asked for a document and does his best with what he has. I spent 45 minutes going through it with him through Ana Paula, translating, asking questions, running the numbers he had written on the back of an envelope. The numbers were optimistic. The equipment list was incomplete. The projection for the first 6 months assumed a volume of work that would require contracts that did not yet exist. It was, as a business plan, inadequate. It was also, as far as I could tell, honest. Rodrigo answered my questions directly and acknowledged the gaps without defensiveness. He said, "I know the plan isn't perfect. I know the business. I know the work." I gave him the $22,000. I gave it to him because I had spent 38 years watching businesses succeed on optimism and fail on optimism, and I could not, from the numbers alone, tell which this would be. I gave it to him because Ana Paula was sitting across from me, and the shape of her face when she watched her brother ask for something he needed had a specific quality that I could not look at without wanting to resolve. I gave it to him because $22,000 was, in the context of my account balance in September 2022, an amount I could give and still be fine. I was still fine in September 2022. I was considerably less fine by the time I did the full accounting. Vivian, the cousin, in October. A dental emergency, an infection that required extraction and implants that the public system did not cover. $7,000. I paid it. Vivian sent flowers to the apartment in Leblon with a card in Portuguese that said things I had Ana Paula translate and that I will not repeat because they were kind and the kindness is part of what makes the accounting difficult. Elio again in November. The land sale had encountered a complication. The buyer had reduced his offer by 15% and Helio had debts that required the full original amount. He needed a bridge loan of $12,000 to be repaid when the sale closed in 60 days. I transferred the $12,000. The sale closed. Helio repaid $8,000 of it and said the remaining $4,000 would follow when he resolved another matter. It has not followed. Felipe again in December. The motorcycle delivery work had been good. He had made enough to put down on a used car, which would allow him to take higher value deliveries. He needed $5,000 for the difference. I gave him $5,000. January 2023. Ana Paula's mother wanted to visit a sister in Fortaleza, a sister she had not seen in 8 years. The flight and a week's accommodation would cost $2,200. I booked the trip for both of them, Dona Conceição and Ana Paula, because Ana Paula had not seen the aunt either. They were gone for 10 days. I stayed in the apartment in Leblon and worked through a book I had been meaning to read and noticed, for the first time since April, how quiet the apartment was when Ana Paula was not in it. When she came back, I understood something that I had not articulated to myself before. I had organized my daily life in Rio around her presence in a way that was structurally similar to how I had organized my daily life in Phoenix around the practice. She was the frame. Everything else was inside it. And I had, in the specific way of someone who has found a new frame after losing the old one, stopped examining what was inside it with the clarity I had spent a career applying to other people's situations. In February, I did the accounting. I did not plan to do it. I was reconciling my U.S. bank account for tax purposes. Even retired, I had some investment income that required filing. And the numbers were there in front of me, and I ran them. From February 2022 to February 2023, the apartment, 12 months at $2,800, $33,600. Living expenses, meals, travel, incidentals, roughly $45,000. The family, Rodrigo's debt, $4,000. The surgery, $16,000. Felipe's motorcycle, $3,000. Helio's registration, $8,000. Rodrigo's business, $22,000. Vivian's dental, $7,000. Helio's bridge loan, $12,000, of which $4,000 remained unpaid. Felipe's car, $5,000. Dona Conceição's trip to Fortaleza, $2,200. Various smaller amounts I had not itemized at the time. A phone for Rodrigo when his broke, school materials for Vivian's daughter, 2 months of Felipe's rent when the delivery work slowed, the television for Dona Conceição. I sat at the kitchen table in the Leblon apartment with my laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold, and I looked at the number at the bottom of the column, $268,000 in 12 months. I had $112,000 left. I sat with that number for a long time. I did not call anyone. I did not say anything to Ana Paula, who was asleep in the bedroom. I sat at the table and I thought about the number with the specific quality of attention I had brought to other people's numbers for 38 years, and I thought, a CPA looked at this. A CPA made these decisions one at a time, each one of which looked defensible in isolation, and a CPA is sitting at this table at 7 in the morning, looking at the result of all of them together. I thought about Greta, my client of 29 years. I thought about what I would have said to Greta if she had come to me with these numbers. I would have said, Greta, you made a series of individually reasonable decisions that collectively represent a pattern you did not see because you were inside it. I would have said, the question now is not how this happened, but what you do next. So I asked myself what I would tell a client to do next. The answer was, stop, review, decide with information. I told Ana Paula in March. I sat across from her at the same kitchen table and I told her what I had found and what the number was and what it meant. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I didn't ask you for all of that. I said, I know. She said, some of it I asked for. The surgery, Rodrigo's debt. I asked for those. I said, I know. She said, the rest of it, I mentioned things. I didn't ask. I thought about this for a while before I answered. Because she was right, technically. She had mentioned things. I had interpreted mentions as requests and had acted on them. The distinction between mentioning and asking is meaningful, and I had not maintained it. I also thought about whether the distinction changes the outcome. The money was gone either way. The number at the bottom of the column was the same whether she had asked or mentioned, whether she had understood what she was doing or had not understood, whether she had loved me or had performed loving me in the specific way required to keep me in the apartment in Leblon writing checks. I still do not know the answer to that question. I have thought about it from every angle I know how to think from, and I cannot determine it with the certainty I would require to say it definitively. That uncertainty is its own specific kind of difficult. I left Rio in May 2023. I did not leave because of Ana Paula. I left because the apartment lease was ending and I could not afford to renew it at $2,800 a month with $112,000 and an awareness of what 12 months of lifestyle in Rio actually cost. I left because Kevin called in April and said, Dad, I want to see you. I want to know you're okay. And I thought, I should be able to answer that question in person rather than over the phone. Ana Paula and I said goodbye at the apartment. She cried. I do not know what the crying meant. I believe it was real. I believe she cared about me. I also believe those things are compatible with everything else that happened, and that the compatibility of those things is what makes the story hard to tell cleanly. I am back in Phoenix. Kevin came for a week in June and we talked. Really talked, the kind of talking we had not done since before the divorce, since before the practice consumed the years in the specific way that practices do. He did not ask me how I let it happen. He asked how I was doing. I told him the truth, which is that I was better than I should be and worse than I wanted to be and working on closing that gap. Mark called from Dallas. He was out of his own divorce by then and had more bandwidth. He said, Dad, $112,000 left out of $380. I said, I know, Mark. He said, what are you going to do? I said, figure out what comes next. He was quiet. Then he said, okay, call me when you know. I have Social Security and a modest investment portfolio that generates income. I am not destitute. I am not the man who flew to Rio in February 2022 with $380,000, but I am not destitute. The distance between those two things is what it is. I have thought about the family, Rodrigo, Felipe, Helio, Vivian, Dona Conceição. with the specific mixture of feelings you have about people who were genuinely present in your life and who were also, whether by design or circumstance, participants in the removal of $268,000 from your account. I do not know how to sort those feelings cleanly. I have stopped trying to sort them cleanly and started trying to simply hold them accurately. The cooking class was real. The Tuesday mornings in Ipanema were real. The Sunday lunch in Mayer with Dona Conceição's food covering the table was real. The walks to the beach at night were real. Whatever else was or was not real, those things were. I spent 38 years reading numbers for other people. The number I did not read was my own. That is the thing I am most accountable for. Not the family's needs, which were real. Not Ana Paula, whatever she was or was not. Not Rio, which is exactly what Carl said it was, and which I would not trade for the specific gray calm of Phoenix in winter. I am accountable for the spreadsheet I did not open, for the discipline I applied to everyone else and suspended for myself, for the specific blindness of a man who understood money with precision for 4 decades and then found something that made precision feel like the wrong tool for the job. It was not the wrong tool. It was never the wrong tool. I know that now. I am trying to make it useful rather than just painful. It is, most days, more useful than painful. Some days, it is the other way. I keep the spreadsheet open now. Every morning, every number, every line. Numbers do not lie. They never did. I just stopped asking them the question.